You run these GeoLift studies, you usually see that they're not even close to as incremental or valuable as, or they look like it based on tracking. High quality data, right? So you need to make sure that you actually have that and that you collect it in the right way. So what breakdown? Should it be zip codes? Should it be cities, DMAs, states? It sounds simple, but when you actually get down to it, it is a little bit trickier than you maybe first think.
We need to create more demand. We cannot only be here. Otherwise, sooner or later, the pool of high demand, it's either going to be, they're going to be smaller, smaller, and smaller, and sooner or later, it's going to dry out. So I think this is super interesting. And I think we're entering this phase of like brand performance as well. Like, will that actually be a term that growth marketeers are going to embrace?
Welcome to the Efficient Spend podcast, where we help marketers turn media spend into revenue. My guests today are the folks from Twigeo, Kalle and Eric. Guys, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
For sure. I think it would be helpful to get started just by each of you giving a very brief introduction into your experience with optimizing marketing spend, and more specifically in GeoLift testing, which is going to be the topic of conversation today. Kalle, maybe you could go first.
Yeah, but I think it's in some way this is like full circle for me. Kind of like I started my career in social media monitoring, which at the moment was this new things that brands did not want to do and try to avoid. Then I did influencer marketing, like data driven. So I actually focused on the data and the results. And since I joined Twigeo 1.5 years ago, I've been a part of the UX team together with Eric. So I work on the commercial end when it comes to our UX offering.
I'm Eric, and I've 6+ years experience in the kind of digital marketing space, and more specifically the app marketing space, I would say, and have been working across a broad range of different analytics roles. Work with brands like Duolingo and Peloton, and today I'm leading kind of all of Twigeo's measurement efforts, where obviously GeoLift is a big part of that mix.
For sure. And when we look at Twigeo as a brand, if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief overview of your client mix, maybe more specifically the folks that are leveraging GeoLift testing as well.
Yeah, it was a great question. Like Twigeo, we're celebrating 10 years, like this year. So we've been around for a while and started off as a growth agency. And after a couple of years, we quite niched into mobile subscription apps and also a little bit of e-com. And like we started off the Geo Experiment program, but we almost like with a couple of selected clients, we realized like, wow, this is a big unlocker, and we do this almost for all of our clients. And we also have GeoLift only clients.
Yeah. Also, kind of adding to that as well, I would say so as Kalle said, our clients like roster is quite broad, but we see like for GeoLift, it's very, very popular among our kind of app clients, especially our iOS app clients, and also, of course, the e-commerce clients.
Yes, I think that GeoLift and more broadly incrementality testing has become very popular as a result of privacy changes and will only be more relevant. Why GeoLift and maybe why GeoLift in comparison to some other incrementality or measurement tests that you could potentially lean into? Why did you make a big bet into GeoLift?
Right. So, I mean, our journey into all of this incrementality kind of started around Apple's ATT when they enforced that with Scan Network and all of those things. So before that happened, we kind of saw that, hey, there's a lot of changes to how things are tracked or are going to be tracked. So we realized that we need kind of more ways to properly and accurately analyze our performance across the channels. And we looked into things like MMM, these first-party lift solutions, things like post-purchase surveys, multi-touch attribution, and of course GeoLift. And all of these different tools have a lot of pros and cons. But for us, GeoLift was a good match for us as an agency and to solve the big pain points our clients had.
In terms of the channels that you currently work with, I know that you are a marketing partner with TikTok. What channels can you run GeoLift on at Twigeo?
So as you said, like we mainly work with the big ones, so the giant ones, right? So it's Meta, it's Google, it's TikTok, Snapchat, the big ones, right? So for all of those, we are able and are running GeoLift studies for all of those across all those channels.
Has there been conversation around opening this up into other channels like TV or out of home or other things like that? Is there a strategic reason why you focused on kind of these larger digital channels?
I would say it's mainly just because that's where our clients spend most of their money. We have run connected TV, a few tests there with quite good success. And there's technically nothing stopping us for running it for out-of-home TV or anything like that. I mean, the whole approach, we're probably going to talk about it more later, but the whole GeoLift or that approach started out measuring out-of-home TV and things like that. So it's just, I guess it's quite funny that now the digital space is kind of adopting these old methods.
Right. I think part of the reason for that is that historically these out-of-home TV, other channels have been harder to measure. Now, digital is becoming harder to measure. But not only that, I think that there's more skepticism around the measurement that we do get in the digital channels. And a lot of marketers have this experience where they run their first incrementality test and they're like, oh, wait, this is what Facebook told us. And this lift test says something completely different. Do you have that experience a lot with clients that you work with?
Yes, definitely. I mean, especially when you run some less incremental channels, if we put it like that, something that might be heavily over-attributing based on last touch, like a brand. I mean, Google brand search is like the biggest one. Same with Apple search ads. Branded, those are usually a big driver if you look at UTM-based tracking or just last touch. And then when you run these GeoLift studies, you usually see that they're not even close to as incremental or valuable as they're set or they look like based on tracking.
Do you have advertisers that try to run a GeoLift test with your methodology and then compare that to the incrementality results of different test design? So for example, they may run like a pre-post test in another channel, or they may use a conversion lift study in Facebook, and then they say, this is what Facebook said, and this is what you're saying. How do you kind of talk through and communicate that, where maybe a marketer at a high level has an understanding of like, this is an incrementality test, but it's a lot more complex than that?
Yeah, I mean, if we start with the pre-post comparison, I mean, that we deal with that a lot for a few of our clients who, I mean, they launch a channel and they see an uplift on across like total conversions, which is very easy to show to your, CMO, CFO, whatever, like, hey, sales increased by this when we launched this channel. The problem with that approach is that it's missing so many important ingredients. I mean, what if you during that period went viral on TikTok or something like that? Then that like will not be the true, like you will just overestimate the value of that channel, right? So that is part of it. We have like seasonality. There's a lot of things under the hood that isn't really captured by these pre-post tests.
I think yes, I agree with you, and I've also seen some advertisers think about running these incrementality tests, once a quarter, or even, a few times a year, and then using those results as the hard truth of what the incrementality is in that channel, and then applying that as a multiplier into the attributed data, which I actually think that there's some challenges with that. But I wonder from your perspective, how do you see GeoLift testing and the results from the GeoLift testing that you conduct fitting into a larger media mix optimization process, whether that be informing media mix modeling or, adding multipliers on like what you're seeing in your last touch or attributed data?
Yeah, I mean, very good and a relevant question for all our clients. So, I mean, to be completely transparent, some of them just do the multiplier approach that you mentioned. That is good enough for them, and they are happy with that. And if they run a quarterly or bi-monthly test, that is enough time period for them to take that assumption and just put a multiplier on the last touch numbers. Our more savvy clients, or I guess clients with more resources, who maybe has an internal MMM or something like that, they kind of leverage these GeoLift results and add it as usually as priors or some type of way to calibrate their MMM, which means that they can kind of use a test and then it's more useful because they have the MMM that also is running maybe monthly, bi-weekly, whatever cadence they have set there.
Sure. Are you able to share any specific clients when you think of someone that's a little bit more sophisticated and what their setup looks like?
Sure. I mean, we're working with, we've done recent tests with Majori, who has that setup. So that will be one I would call out that does that. We also have had a client in Europe where we actually did their MMM as well. And there we obviously calibrated that. So that's a big brand, like a kind of a Netflix of the EU, which calls Viaplay. And there we basically did run continuous GeoLift studies and feed that into the MMM, which was that was a very efficient way to allocate your budget in a good way.
Sure. I think if you think about kind of the spectrum of brands with their measurement setups, I actually don't think that smaller startups that are just getting started really need to get too sophisticated, especially when they're not spending as much, and basically anything that they spend is going to show a lift, right? Like if I have a brand and I'm starting tomorrow and I spend on $10,000 on Facebook, that's going to be incremental because nobody knows about me. But when I'm Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Airbnb, that conversation of incrementality becomes much more important. I guess if you take a look at your client mix, I'm sure it runs the gamut. Where marginally do you think there is the most value in adopting a GeoLift testing methodology or process?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like if you're a smaller client, you have one, maybe two channels. You will know kind of incrementality just by looking at your blended or total numbers. So what we're seeing is usually when you go from maybe from two channels to three, that's kind of where it starts to become interesting and valuable to see that relationship. And spend levels, we never run a successful test below $5,000 US dollars. And that would be the absolute minimum. But if you're not able to spend like $10,000 on a monthly basis on a channel, I don't think it's worth it, to be honest.
Are you able to share maybe a few or maybe one specific example of a brand that has done some measurement stuff, worked with you to solve a specific challenge when it comes to understanding their incrementality, and then what those results were and how that informed and allowed them to optimize their media mix?
Yeah, but I think I can add a little bit to that. Like we have several clients, but I think a really interesting one is Hedonist. I think they're mainly famous for a lot of people for being on Hot Ones, the show where they ask spicy questions to celebrities. We started working with them from farmers markets to where they are today. So we've been a part of the journey for quite some time. And I think what we've done together as we scaled, like we started off, as Eric said, like we wanted 2 channels, and then it wasn't like a big thing, but then we added a channel, a channel, a channel, and a channel. And then we've been looking into everything from, like, we looked at Meta, we looked at connected TV, we looked at Google search, and now, like, last we did an incrementality test we did an awareness campaign on YouTube, and it was actually incremental. It was like, wow, this is actually, we can sell by doing awareness campaigns on YouTube. So I think they have been a really good case. Like, I think it comes down to that also with clients, that they need to kind of like trust the process or trust the method, that this actually is the source of truth. And I think since we worked with them for a long time, they are 100% with, okay, this is it. This is the method we should leverage in order to be comfortable enough with putting more money or more spend or investing in a new channel. Which is super fun to work with one of those type of clients that immediately say, ooh, this is something we should do more of.
When a client is more hesitant to buy in, or when a client is maybe somebody that's, a growth marketer, gets this stuff, but then has to sell that up to the executive team and tell them, hey, listen, the data that we've been seeing for the past couple of years and last touch is not telling the full story. What is your perspective on how to communicate that effectively to give folks that might not have as much expertise in this stuff confidence in the data and the results?
It's a good question. I think I come from a background working with like a lot of big brands like Adobe, Samsung, Puma, and so on. I think it depends a little bit on like the marketing person that you're speaking to. Like, are you open to this? Because I would say some companies, I'm not going to drop any names now, but they're like really, really big media spenders. Is on the level on McDonald's that you mentioned, where it's more been like, oh, we forgot to have some kind of call to action thing. We spent $200,000 on this. It was a success. We're just going to call it a success. And we're talking about like people quite high up the funnel. So I think in those cases, but it's going to be quite tough. I think it needs to, if you're going to go to somewhere that they feel like, okay, my boss, he might be open to this. I think you need to simplify it. Because I would say like in this niche of people that I have already, I would say like discovered incrementality, was at a TikTok event last week, and I thought it was quite good. Imagine like that it is like, I would probably pitch it like maybe over a coffee to your boss and saying like, imagine it's a football game. Like, how many passes do you have to make like before you actually make the touchdown? Do you think it was only the person who did the touchdown that was responsible for creating the goal? I think it's at least a good way of getting it in there. But then I think also, again, like show the efficiency and show that you can do more things. If you're going to pitch a CMO, if you're going to pitch a CFO, show like, this is how much money we could save. You could save it now. But the problem with that as a marketeer, you do not want to lose your budgets. And if you do the savings part, you might lose some part of your budgets.
For sure. I'm working on a paper right now, and I am trying to define a new term that is taking the concept of product marketing fit, which is creating a product that satisfies a specific demand, and aligning that to paid marketing. And I'm calling that paid marketing fit. The idea being that you should align your marketing spend to demand. And what that means is the first dollars that you spend should be on the highest demand audience. And then as you scale your budget, you actually go into low demand audiences. This is different than a full funnel marketing strategy, which would say, let's build some awareness, then let's build some intent, then let's convert them. And my perspective is demand is this thing that's naturally occurring. in the world that for a given product or service, there are people that are going to be high intent and ready to purchase. And so you want to spend your first dollars on those. The question then becomes, what happens when you hit diminishing returns and where do you go, right? There's only a certain amount of high intent audience. It might be a larger high intent audience for Apple than, some very small business, but it's finite, right? The idea though is that as you are operating an at-scale media mix, you don't want to just continue to spend all of your money in these performance channels. You're going to hit diminishing returns. It's not going to be effective for you. And I think geo-lift testing is a way to normalize some of this stuff, because it might be that an additional $100,000 spent in a reach or awareness campaign or out-of-home campaign is going to find more incremental new users and be more incremental than just adding $100,000 in paid search. The paid search CPA might look better, but it's not actually finding you new users.
I totally agree. I think it's there. I can talk about the industry here. Also, that it's kind of like get caught up or trapped in like, we don't need to create demand. This is something that we tackle quite often and have to go in and talk about. Like, we need to create more demand. We cannot only be here. Otherwise, sooner or later, it's like the pool of high demand. It's either going to be, they're going to be smaller and smaller, and sooner or later, it's going to dry out. So I think it's super interesting. And I think we're entering this phase of like brand performance as well. Like, will that actually be a term that growth marketeers are going to embrace? I don't know, but I'm hoping that at least.
Yeah, I think it's the first time I've heard it put like that, Paul. But I mean, I can see our clients, they kind of went down that road to, like, when they come to us, they have a lot of money to spend. We help them on these more performance, like the Metas, the Googles, etc. And we always hit this point, right, where things are not, like, we can't really spend more than that because we're just hitting a wall, basically. And that's when you need to go with the kind of, start running these awareness channels, usually YouTube, some awareness on Meta, could be TV, connected TV, TikTok, I guess, is somewhere in between there. When we run GeoLift studies, we look at exactly that, I would say. So because you will never see these awareness channels look good with like conventional measurements, right? So the ad networks will not capture the value of their own awareness impact in a sense. So what we look at is, of course, if it impacts direct sales, but we also look at how, for example, does the GeoLift impact efficiency on things like Google search or retargeting or things like that, right? So we use the GeoLift study to not only look at the direct effect, but indirect effect on other channels as well, which you always need to do.
For sure. I think it's in these situations where, you can look at data, but then you kind of have to take a step inward and look at yourself and your own consumer behavior and how you purchase products. You're not seeing one ad and then converting. Like that's not how things happen. I give an example of Allbirds shoes. I've known about Allbirds for years. I've seen thousands of ads on TV, on Facebook, on Google, and I bought a couple pairs over the past couple years, right? But like when I bought that pair, if I'd seen the Facebook ad last, they would have converted, attributed all of that to Facebook, which is not necessarily the best way to go about things. Taking a transition now, I want to dive a little bit deeper into your particular methodology. So GeoLift testing at a high level, there's a bunch of different ways to conduct this, right? There's a couple of publishers that have their own GeoLift testing capabilities, like Google has GeoX, but you can also even run this without any partner just by doing something in-house and saying, we're going to find these DMAs that are correlated. We're going to run increases in these specific areas and do this whole test design and then look at the results. I know one of the unique differentiators of what y'all do is the synthetic control method. I wonder at a high level if you can kind of explain, well, maybe actually before we get into the synthetic control method, what are some of the key challenges that you see with clients when starting up a GeoLift test? And how do you kind of approach that?
Right. So we have a few clients who kind of came to us after they tried this themselves, or at least designed a test themselves, and wanted to kind of run things by us to make sure it was a good setup. I mean, the first thing is, of course, high quality data, right? So you need to make sure that you actually have that and that you collect it in the right way. So, for example, the basics of GeoLift testing, of course, is that you group users by location. So the question is, of course, okay, but what breakdown? Should it be zip codes? Should it be cities, DMAs, states? I mean, in the US, that's the way. We have internationally, it's even more complicated in some cases. So that is like one thing that you need to think about, and how that translates to the actual ad network you're going to run it on. So I think it sounds simple, but when you actually get down to it, it is a little bit trickier than you maybe first think.
One of the things that we kind of struggled with, and I'll give some context. So I've conducted a number of GeoLift tests. One way to do this is to look at certain conversion volume and to try to find DMAs that are correlated with each other, that move in similar ways, which we've done. And then what we did was we said, okay, DMA A showed this lift quarter over quarter. DMA B showed this lift. DMA C, the control group, showed this lift. What was the difference between those two? And then compare the difference between target and control to get a lift number. Simple enough, right? What that ignores, though, it ignores a couple things, but one of the main challenges for me is, how do you pick the right DMAs? So, for example, what we did, we conducted a more sophisticated analysis this year or this quarter, and it's harder to do because you don't have DMA level spend in all of your channels and things like that, right? And like with iOS, with app network channels, it's harder to get. But what we did is we tried to get to a CAC by DMA. Advertisers could look at a ROAS DMA or whatever, some sort of KPI. And then what we're saying is, let's pick the DMAs that have the best performance. Like, I don't want to increase in New York if my CAC is really high there. I'd rather pick this other DMA to test in. How do you think about incorporating not only like performance data into a GeoLift test to know that you're targeting the right DMAs, but then also to make sure that those DMAs are correlated and that you're going to have, good test design?
Right. So, I mean, at Twigeo, we built our own kind of engine or solution. So what we do is that we take the client's data by console conversion data, if that installs, revenue, whatever, by location, and look at exactly what you say. We look at correlations. We run that through our kind of machine learning engine to look at correlations, to make sure that the two kind of groups are the same, right? So is New York and LA similar to a combination of, I don't know, Chicago, Washington, or Miami, right? So that's like step one. And when we create these correlations, we obviously need to make sure that they are stable over time. So what we do is that we do cross-validation to make sure that it's not just a fluke that these places are correlated, but we can actually predict that they will behave the same in the future on unseen data. So that's more the math part of it, I guess. Then we also look at kind of what you alluded to. We also need to go into the ad networks when we can to make sure that has Meta, for example, actually spent money in these places where we want to spend money, because otherwise, if we do these exclusions and we don't spend there, it's useless to run the test. So we need to make sure that Meta previously has seen at least some type of efficiency in these kind of areas.
Sure. And what are your thoughts on decisioning on DMAs based on not only what Meta is doing, but like holistically what performance looks like in a given DMA, and then also what market penetration looks like in a DMA, because that's a big thing as well. We talk about diminishing returns, right? And maybe that's part of the correlation, but like, maybe New York and Austin move together, but New York, we've already spent a lot of money and we're at a high volume and we're close to diminishing returns. And Austin's a smaller DMA that we haven't spent as much in. How do you account for that?
I would usually say that we do not account for that too much. To be honest, what we do is that we want a big enough number of DMAs to make sure that it is not as impactful if that happens. It is a factor, and usually what we do is we trust the data to show these things. Like, it will tell us if they're correlated or not over a long period of time. Of course, what we do is that when we run these test designs, we get a lot of different options that has the best statistical probability of being a good test. We obviously run this by our marketing team and the client's marketing team, and it's very common that these very big areas like New York, LA, clients usually have opinions about those. So in some cases we exclude them, or in some cases we force them to be included in the test. So it's a lot of more, I guess, marketing intuition that is combined with the data.
How do you think about running a targeted geo test where you are saying, I'm going to spend incremental budget in this area versus we want to reduce? And I'll give you a specific example, right? Many brands have a media mix where they have a certain amount of budget allocated towards experimental channels, new tests, things like that, which I think you can run GeoLift and you can say, I want to increase, and this is how we're going to do that. But then there's also the level of, we know we have to reduce X amount this quarter, right? For seasonal brands, they might, spend a lot in Q4, but then they have to cut down in Q1. How do you think about applying GeoLift to that? Do you do a lot of exclusion tests where, for example, we know that Q1 is going to be slower, so we're going to exclude some DMAs in paid search while also reducing and get a sense of incrementality that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, I would say maybe a third of our tests are like that. And it's very common when we do that, what you said in seasonality, but usually when we want to test kind of their core channels. So let's say Meta is their biggest channel. It's very dangerous for them as a business to exclude half of the areas to target. I mean, the leadership will say, no way, we can't risk that business impact, right? So that's how we started doing this, what we call inverse tests. So instead of launching something in places, you exclude marketing in a few areas. And the good thing with that is that you only need to do that you can exclude a smaller audience. So usually if you do a classic GeoLift study, maybe you need to run in, let's say, 60%, run nothing in 40%. With this inverse approach, we've been able to get that down to 10%. So you basically run in 90% of the US and you only pass in 10%. So it's been very popular.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. What our approach has been more like, we have national, and then when we're doing these GeoLift tests, we'll pick, out of the 200 DMAs, we'll pick 4 to 5, and maybe we'll pick 1 DMA per. The DMA tests or the lift tests that you're doing, I guess they're a little bit more broader. Like they're kind of either splitting your spend by 50% or more. Is that what that looks like?
If we do a classic one, yes, for sure. It's easier to get a good test, just statistically, if you have a more balanced kind of test and control group, because you have more places to choose from, right? When you create these synthetic control groups. But of course, we need to actually take into consideration that it's marketing we're doing, we're impacting the business. So it's always a business versus science question there.
Sure. Okay. So the idea is essentially like the larger, the broader the location that you're targeting or excluding, the less there is these small variances of we might be better in this DMA versus that DMA, or this city versus that city. You're trying to, I guess, even out, balance out that stuff.
Exactly. For example, like we have a classic. Let's say we do in the US, we have DMAs. I think it's around 200 DMAs in the US. So it's going to be so much easier for our kind of method to find a good test and control group if they have, let's say, 100 DMAs to choose from. So what a synthetic control group is that all of these 100 control DMAs are included in the holdouts, but they have different weightings, which are based on this cross-validation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a fancy Bayesian machine learning or regression analysis that just creates a model out of all of these DMAs, and we weight them based on creating the best model, basically. And
the data that's going into that is basically like a brand's own conversion, like unattributed data.
Correct. The whole, the total, to see how conversion behavior looks like across different places.
Sure. I think that's that can be contrasted with what we're kind of looking at, which I think is interesting for advertisers to think about, because some of the things we're thinking about is like, how do we spend enough in a given DMA to get the results that we want, right? Like, what is the impression volume, or what is the frequency that we have to hit in a given DMA to get lift? But do you have any perspective on like that more micro kind of testing,
When we design the test, we are kind of our machine learning algorithm strategy. It gives us like, this is the minimum budget and you need to spend based on estimates of your, say, let's say return on ad spend or cost per install, or whatever the metric would be, and that is based on how stable your data is. So if let's say we have a perfect model where New York and LA is perfectly modeled by some other states, that means that you can spend very little money to actually see the incrementality. Whereas if you have more noisy data, then you will need to spend more to get a good read on the true incrementality.
Do you have any examples of clients that have run these tests that have made very bold changes as a result of what they saw?
Yeah, I can go into that a little bit. So, for example, a client that we mentioned, the big streaming service, Viaplay, were quite, we helped them with both MMM and with GeoLifts. They were quite early into looking into, is TikTok really incremental? Is that a channel that we should bet more on? And I think we started off small, but in a big country in Europe called Poland, next to Germany, where we did this GeoLift test, we actually saw like, wow, TikTok is a really good channel for us. And they became like our biggest spender on TikTok after that, because they saw the power of the channel. If you compared like what they saw in the TikTok ads platform compared to what they saw with our GeoLifts, it was like night and day. So I think we've seen that. Now we also had another client can share, and I don't know what they're going to do with this, but where we actually saw that like did a comparison GeoLift. So like they compared Google, like non-brand search, with Meta, and where we figured out like that Google, like it's not ROI positive. So it's kind of like of course, like this is a big, hefty budget that they will need to switch somewhere else. And as you know, like how will they be able to switch it and still scale it? Where could it put it instead? But if they're not getting, like as you said, like with your new method, there is like it's no use continuing on. So it will be super interesting to see where will they place their budgets instead, because I find it hard for them to continue on down this road.
Sure. It's funny. I can come up with hypotheses for why both of those results occurred. On the TikTok side, I'm assuming it's going to be an app client. They were running app install campaigns, and then they're seeing poor results in scan, crazy CPAs, and then they run an incrementality test, and they're like, oh, okay. Wow, scan's measurement methodology is very limiting. I think that's something you hear about a lot, and been a struggle for some of the spend that I've managed, where the results on iOS look poor, after iOS 14.5, but you have a conviction that they are driving things, and GeoLift validates that. On the paid search side, non-brand paid search is kind of historically seen as like very incremental, high intent. People are searching for the thing. But depending on the size of the brand, I think that my feeling would be the larger a brand, the less incremental non-brand paid search is, because folks already know about you. So if you are the biggest credit card in the world and someone's searching for credit cards and they click on your ad, they probably already know about you. But yeah, it's funny. Like there's these kind of like common sense things that these tests can uncover, and then it's like the oh shit moment of, oh, okay, yeah, right, that makes sense. But there is like a belief system too, right? Like just because the performance marketer might believe that, like there needs to be belief in the CMO or whoever's making those like large budget decisions. Because what do you do when you run an incrementality test? You see your non-brand paid search is incremental. That's 30% of your budget. Now you have a forecast for the next year that was assuming you were to get X amount of conversions for that spend. Like, how do you kind of act on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have a few examples where some of our clients, like we run one test and this can't be true. They run another one and realize, okay, shit, we need to believe this now because all the evidence is pointing in that direction.
Isn't that a thing as well, like with the tests also, that you kind of figure out and you can unite on what the actual truth also is? Because I think like when you look at the data and you look at, some person might look into like Meta's ad platforms, Google Analytics, it might be Shopify and so on. And I think that's a problem in general, that not everybody is aligned. And finally, maybe after, as Eric said, like after 2 tests, you find like, okay, this is probably the truth. We should probably believe in this. So I think it also needs to be alignment in the team with what do we consider to be the truth.
For sure. As much as you could say that there is truth in data, human beings are still optimizing the media mix these days. Might not be like that in 5 years. Like maybe, there's no marketers and it's just some sort of AI doing all this stuff. But for now, we have results, and then we have human beings interpreting the results. So as important as the test design and the structure and all that stuff is, it's even more important on making sure that the people decisioning on it understand it, have conviction in it, and make improvements. Just kind of wrapping up here, talking about where we're headed in the future. Google just released their playbook on marketing measurement. I think media mix modeling continues to be more popular. From your perspective, from Twigeo, like what are the product enhancements you're doing? How are you kind of responding to the next 3 to 5 years in terms of innovation in media mix optimization?
Sure. I mean, we're obviously strong believers in GeoLift testing or other experiments. So that could also be the first channel first party testing. But that is obviously not enough. So it's all about how do we bring everything together. So if that's an MMM, if that's some type of modeling, we strongly believe in post-purchase service as well. I think it's an underutilized method to merge all of those sources, and I think a blend of them is going to be the way to get as close to the truth as possible. Because, I mean, I worked with over 6 years trying to get to the truth, and it's always a moving target. You will never know exactly what the value is of that channel.
I think the good part, at least, like looking back, I remember like 10 years ago, when it came out, when the view was 1 second on Meta, and people, what? Was it only a second? It was kind of felt like we've been lied to for years. Now you actually have to pursue, it's all the tricky part, because there's no source of truth, which it kind of was before, but you need to pursue something that is more accurate, and you need to invest both time and energy in it. But what hopefully we'll see out from that is that there will be better bets from marketing teams based on that they leverage this test that will help them to future-proof their measurement. So that I'm looking forward to. And then I think will there be some smart AI system or new AI tools that will be deployed into this? I would say with the pace how things is developing, yes. If you ask me what will happen in 5 years in that space, don't ask me. It's too hard to predict.
Sure. Last question, and either one of y'all can answer it. This is the Efficient Spend podcast, right? So if you can maybe take a second to think about your own clients that you're working with Twigeo, what's the most efficient spend that you've seen, and what's the most inefficient spend that you've seen?
At least inefficient. It's a tie, I think, between Google brand and, weirdly enough, some type of mid-funnel campaigns I've seen on Meta being weirdly useless. So that was the biggest shock to me, I would say. Most efficient spend has been probably on TikTok, just because it's so different from what you think it is versus what it actually is.
Cool. Kalle, Eric, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Where can folks learn about you?
You can go into twigeo.com. You can learn more about us, or ULIF services, and so on. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, here we go. Swedish name, Kalle Mobeck. Maybe there'll be a link somewhere. KalleMobeck. And connect there. I think that's the best way to get in touch with me. Eric, do you want to plug something? Or
no, that's fine.
Okay. Connect with me and I will connect you with Eric.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.